I'm going to convert the lion to make him look more like a Space Wolf Primarch. And why would you do that? Well, what if you like Space Wolf but you want to play Ironstorm or Gladius? You're not going to bring those fancy boys like Khadgar or Guilliman or the lion. You want to bring a Space Wolf Primarch, or something that at least looks like a Primarch, that could be a Primarch. So here I've got the lion's lower part, and I'm gonna get this together. And now that that body is done, I'm gonna kitbash that with the upper part of Radukar the Beast. Look at him. Doesn't that look like a proper Space Wolf? I mean, the legs would be a little bit too demonic for this purpose, even though, you know, maybe if I'm kitbashing Russ, he's been in the warp for a little bit too long, maybe. But I want to make him look like an actual Space Marine, you know, maybe a proper replacement for Ragnar or something like that. And so this is going to be the upper part of Radukar, and then torso is prepared. I left off this front part because it has a paw of a wolf hanging down, and it might get in the way when I try to fit these legs up in there. But before I can do that, I have to cut off this part of the lion. And so with my little saw here, I'll just start sawing away and trying to get through it. Now let's also scrape off some of these decorations of the knee pads, because they have not really a very strong Dark Angels iconography, but it's not Space Wolves, so let's get rid of it. So let's do a little dry fitting next, because I think I got everything out of the way. I can fit him like this, and I think it would be a pretty decent pose. He's a little bit more twisted than the lion does. He's more like the Radukar the Beast pose, where he's looking sideways while standing still. It's cool, I think it works. I just have to figure out how to fill up all those gaps that are there. It's actually not that difficult. I just have to cut the sort of torso bits from Radukar's legs off and glue them into those. So now he actually has sides, and it's going to be easier to cover up any smaller gaps that I have. Otherwise, this completely open, it would never have worked. So now I have to figure out a way that I can kind of slide this up in there and make the top part of this mini fit the bottom part. Let's see if I can get this without breaking anything important here. There. Oh, we got it right there. Like this. I can make him a little bit hunched over, which I like. It's more like a prowling wolf stalking his prey, and still have his foot up on some heretic or something else that he's stomping on while staring menacingly right at you like that. I think it looks cool. Still a bit of a gap here and there to fill up and to sort of cover up, but that's just going to be a little bit of green stuff. There we go, big plaque of green stuff. I'm not a great sculptor, but this will work because I can cover it with some Space Wolf bits, some bones, some fur, some bits, and I don't know, some more weapons maybe that he's carrying. Now, I really love the head of Radukar, and I think it looks good enough as a Space Wolf. So this just goes straight on there. And then I can start thinking about the actual positioning of the mini on a base. Right now, I'm thinking kind of a position like this, where he is jumping off a wall onto somebody or onto something. I quite like this pose like this, because if I stand him upright, he looks a little bit, I don't know, a little bit weird. It's not the pose I want, it's not dynamic enough. So something like this, where he's jumping off a wall onto somebody, I think might be a good idea. Here, let me get this base here. I'm working on my Ankron, so something like this, where he's jumping off, getting the drop on some heretics. But I'm not that happy with the claws. They look cool, they look brutal, but they look too demonic for me. Like I said, I want to keep this guy a Space Marine, so I gotta find him a new weapon. And I gotta think what I want here. See, if you're thinking Space Wolves, you think axes, because Vikings and axes. There's something there. I wouldn't mind trying out a little chain axe on him, but I would like to go for a bit of an Odin look. So give him an eye patch, give him a massive shield, and then a spear rather than an axe. And for that, I think I got a pretty cool spear. And it's this spear here, and this thing is old, very old. It comes from the Chaos Knights from Fantasy, from the old world, and they just got re-released. So if you want a cool looking spear like this, that is a bit low tech, doesn't have too much chaos symbology, but still looks pretty vicious, then you can get them now. And I think if I can fit this in here, I'm gonna have a decent looking spear for this old grizzled Viking Space Marine. So we'll cut off his hand and then see if we can fit this on right there. I think it will work. I need to cut off more of the wrist, and then it could work perfectly fine like this. So now his positioning becomes important again. If I want to have him sort of jump off, he needs his spear somewhere like this. So the spear is done. Now the other side. Again, I'm not 100% sure if I want to keep the claw. I think it looks cool, I can keep it, but I think it would contrast too much with the other hand. I could glue a shield here onto that bracer, and the thing is, I have these leftover Space Wolf shields, and they're cool, but they're a little bit too small for this guy. This just won't. So I got these things over here from the Stormcast Eternals, and that shield is a little bit bigger at least. And I can fill it out with Space Wolf bits to make it look like a Space Wolf shield again. So to make the shield more Space Wolf, I'm just going to scrape off this part over here to make it a nice flat surface. And then I'm just going to take the Space Wolf shield that I've left over and glue it on top, like that. It'll be kind of like a double shield, so, you know, we put a shield on a shield to make it even more shieldy. Why not? And then that double shield goes onto his bracer right here, making sure it's upright properly, and have his hand stick out a little bit. I really quite like that wolf claw. I think I'm going to keep it. It's nice, he's half wolf and half not. He's still very much in charge, but he's already starting to turn a little bit. Or maybe just one side of him is starting to turn. Now, the shield like this, it's not going to stick very well, so it needs some leather straps strapped to his bracer. So a bit of green stuff cut into a strip. I'm just going to use one of these straps here, try to get it onto the shield, and then I'll cut off the excess. You know, I always get at least 3 times as much green stuff as I need, and then I have to throw it all away. But this way, at least I have a pretty good strap going over his bracer, and the shield is now fitted to it. And while I have the green stuff out, I might as well just give him that eye patch that I was talking about. And so this time I just made a little, well, a long little sausage of green stuff, and I'm gonna see if I can do the strap around his head first with this, and then kind of put the eye patch on top of it. I really suck at green stuff sculpting. If anybody knows like a good source for a couple of tutorials on really good green stuff sculpting, leave a comment in the description below, because I desperately need it, and I just don't know. Maybe I'm missing something, maybe I'm missing tools, maybe I'm doing everything wrong. I don't know, but it's just never going right. So I'm gonna give this guy an eye patch that goes, or a strap, I mean, that goes from his cheek over here, across his eye, over his head, and then to the back of his head. And again, 10 times as much green stuff as I actually need for this, but hey, who cares? The shit doesn't really cost much. Now the strap is too thick, so I'm just gonna take my knife and I'm gonna cut off straps off the side and sort of pull them off and get rid of them. And that way I can thin down this strap without sort of deforming it again and having to put it on back there again. And I hope this will get me a decent result like this. Not bad at all, if I say so myself. So if you'd like a tutorial on how to sculpt green stuff eye patches, let me know in the comments below. In the meantime, it's time to keep working with some green stuff, but also to get some of those Space Wolf bits to cover up the nastiness that is around his waist, and also to make him look like he fits a little bit more in the 40k universe. And we're doing this with the special roller from Green Stuff World. Very easy. You must know this, you must have seen this before. If not, you should get one of these. I'll put a link in the description below. It's very easy, you make a nice hose like this, and now you can just add it to the mini wherever you need it to go. I'm just gonna fit it into place right there, cover up the green stuff over there, and then cut off the tips on both sides to make it look like it's a proper hose, but it's going into his equipment. And I got a bunch of little Space Wolf bits, like these fur tail talismans, but also I got a avian skull or a wolf skull, don't know exactly what this is, but all these bits and pieces, they'll go on his belt and make him look like he's carrying loads and loads of these talismans and trophies with him. And then we need to add the one thing that every Space Marine has, his backpack. And I was looking at the regular ones from the regular intercessors, and they're way too small. I mean, look at this guy, he's about twice the size of a Marine. There's no way a normal backpack would fit there. So then I looked at the heavy intercessors, and even they are too small. I mean, look at this here. Let me see if I can show you on the camera. Like that. It will look just comically small. So I'm going for the Inceptors. These guys have an even bigger backpack. You can see here part of it. And I think with that, I can make it look kind of appropriate for his size. So let's assemble one first. So as you can see here, this is a little bit bigger and a bit more appropriate, but here's the thing, it's sticking out a little bit and it's touching his head, so I'm gonna have to clip and file and work away a little bit of this plastic. And if he's wearing this, I didn't put on the chicken wings that come with the Interceptor backpack, because I don't know exactly how it's gonna fit, and you need to put them there as well, and the wolf head's gonna weigh blah blah blah. But I just might make a smash Primarch. How about that? So all I have to do is clip off a little bit of the piece over there, and then I can kind of position it like this, where it's almost touching his head. It's right here, resting on a wolf's head as well, and it's resting there on the shoulder pad. So there's enough contact points where I can glue it in place. And then it has these gaps, of course, on the sides and everywhere, and that needs filling up. But I think it's actually a pretty easy job because of the fur cloak. I can just make this all fur and blend it in with the rest of the cloak and make it look like the backpack is kind of coming out of the cloak. And I think this looks pretty cool so far. I still have to think if I want to put in those chicken wings or if I just want to damage it and make it look worn or something like that. I think this is getting somewhere. I think it still needs a little bit here and there, but it needs some more 40k. That's the problem. First, let's just do the green stuff, and I'm just gonna fill up all these big gaps between the backpack and the mini himself with just green stuff clumps, little sausages that I sort of stuff in there, and then later on I'll sculpt on the green stuff fur on there, because this will also help the backpack stick to the body, because you know it's only touching like 3-4 small points on the mini, but where there's glue. And that's just not enough. If I want to actually play with this at some point, and I think he looks cool enough to actually play with him on a tabletop, then he needs to be pretty sturdy if I'm moving him around. Now what we'll do for the fur, I'll show you on a top-down camera. I cut off just a tiny piece of green stuff, and that I roll into a little tiny sausage like that, which has 2 sharp points. It's just rubbing between 2 fingers and you'll get this result. Now that needs to go on here, and then the idea is that one of those sharp points is going to hang over the armor, while the other part is going to be used to glue it or sort of stick it in place. And if you keep doing that, you get a result kind of like that. And this doesn't look great, but it needs to dry a little bit to make sure it's firmly in place, and then I can start pulling those sticky bits, the pointy bits out a little bit more, make it look a little bit more like fur. This takes ages. You don't want to do this on your whole army, but just a single guy like this, yeah, I'll make the effort. So I'll show you what it looks like at the end. So the fur is pretty much done. It's still drying up a little bit, and then it will look decent enough, good enough. I'm not a great sculptor, like I said before, but this will do. And especially after painting it and making it sort of the same color as the other fur, it'll look fine enough. Now I still got a little bit of green stuff left over here. And so, like I said before, the spear, it doesn't look 40k enough, and that really makes the rest of the mini not look 40k enough, in my opinion. The backpack makes a big difference, but I got this little green stuff worm here, and I'm just going to roll it into some piping, some hosing, and then I'll stick it to the spear right here behind his hand. And to make it look like it's coming out of the backpack, I'll see if I can sort of have it go inside him over there. So let's give that a try. Let's see how far we get, because you know, this is still a very flexible piece of green stuff, and it's very long right now. So I think if I cut it over here, I can fit it under his arm, and it will look like it's still hanging kind of loose, and that will instantly make it look a little bit more 40k. Now this isn't the only thing that will help. I'm also going to add some of this wire. This stuff is from Green Stuff World. It comes in all sorts of diameters. This is 1mm, I got half, 2mm. There's all kinds of variety, and you can make it look like it's cabling coming sort of out of his backpack from there. And I'm gonna make it sort of go along with the pipe that we just put in there and make it look like this, some cables going from the back there. Now this will help it. I also want to make it look a little bit more vicious, so what I'm also going to add, some hobby chain, again from Green Stuff World. I'll put links to all of this stuff in the description below, so if you want to get some for yourself, you can use those links. They're affiliate links that give me a little bit of kickback, and you don't pay any extra, so it's a win-win for everybody. Great way to support my channel if you want to. So the chain needs to be wrapped around his wrist, of course, and then it goes around the weapon in a different spot right here in the back. And I'll wrap it around the haft of his spear again, and then he'll have a nice spear chained to his hand. Now since I have a little bit of the chain already cut off and left over, I'm just going to add it to the shield to make it look a little bit cooler as well. You know, chains are cool. We want more chains. So chain here. I think my dog's going crazy. I don't know if you guys can hear that when I'm recording, but there's definitely something wrong. Maybe there's leaves blowing in the garden. We can't have leaves blowing in the garden, of course. But hey, let's continue. The chain goes right there. I'll wrap it around the shield and maybe around his wrist as well. Why not? Let's make it look like he has chained the shield to his wrist as well. Kind of fits with somebody who's half turning into a wolf, becoming more of a beast. Might be a good idea to chain your weapons to your arms so you don't drop them and just start fighting with your claws. Let me get that piece in place. As I'm talking, I actually quite like the idea, so I'm just going to properly chain his shield to his arm as well. and add just more chain to make it completely wrap around his wrist. Because right now, it's just a little bit over here and just goes over the edge. Let's do a proper chaining to his wrist. I think it makes sense. I think I got a long way from just Radukar being kind of a fantasy, and now he's more like a space marine, a Primarch equivalent at least. But I still got one piece left that I really like to put on there, and that's this Space Wolf's banner. I can put it on the back of his backpack, right there on that flat little surface. And it's cool, the tails, the talismans, sort of sway in the same direction as the tail of the cloak and everything else. It has at least the same sort of direction of movement. And I think after this, the kitbash is pretty much done and it's time to start painting him. Not yet, because yes, all the marines have backpacks, but all the coolest marines have skulls as well. And I didn't put any skulls on him yet. Lots of Space Wolf trophies, but no skulls. So he's got an orc head over there and a human over there, and then I'm going to just put this chain skull over here. And this one comes from the Chaos Marauder box from Warhammer Old World. It's full of really good bits and pieces like hooks, flails, stretched skin cloaks, skulls on chains. It's a really amazing box if you do some kit bashing with your marines. So this goes right here, and then we're gonna do some pre-weathering. First, let's make some knocks in the armor here and there, because this is definitely from the lion and it looks too neat and clean. So I'm just gonna cut out little triangles like this to make it look like there's something that just hit this rim and now there's a knock out of it. And I'm gonna do this on more of these parts. Just get some of the sharp edges off, make it look like it's damaged, scratched, scuffed. You know, kicking in orc skulls damages your boots after a while. And then after this, with some of this Tamiya putty, I'm gonna roughen up the cloak. And I see other people use liquid green stuff for this, which is valid, works perfectly well, but the problem with liquid green stuff is that you use it once and then the pot dries out and you can't use it anymore. And this Tamiya putty actually closes. So I'm just gonna use a very rough, nasty old dry brush, and I just stipple this onto the cloak. And this will give it a rough texture, just a little bit, not too rough, but it will make it look a little bit more worn and a little bit more old and like it's like getting really damaged. And then I think it's finally time to prime him and to paint. And of course, I'm going to paint this Space Wolf in a grimdark style. I've got here 5 different grays. 2 of them have a little bit of blue in them. These are Gravestone Blue, Cold Corpse Blue, and then I got Charcaradon Blue, Dungeonstone Grey, Charcaradon Grey, Dungeonstone Grey, and Wizard Grey. Doesn't really matter exactly which paint you take, as long as they're grey and you have a couple that have a little bit of blue in them. And then I'm just gonna stipple this on the armor. And I'm using a stippling technique because that makes it look a little bit more weathered and worn. And I'm just starting with the darkest, working my way up to the lightest. And then bit by bit, it'll start looking more and more like a nice weathered grey armor. Here we go with a little bit of the lighter grey, and I'm just dabbing it on. It comes on there like nice blotchy little spots, and that's what I want. I want to make it look like it's really worn and weathered, not rusted through, but clearly this isn't taken care of for a long time. You know, the grimdark style, there's not enough resources to do everything. And so I keep going and building this up layer after layer after layer, and then you get this really cool lightly blue mottled Space Wolf armor. I like it, it's very rough. It's a little bit lighter than I want it to be, but that's because I'm going to wash it later with grime and dirt and all the other stuff. And then, you know, you're going to darken it anyway. I'm going to use the same technique for the cloth that he has here. And here I've got Steel Legion Drab, Rockart Flesh, Sandry Dust, and Ushabti Bone. And it's just the exact same method, the same technique. Just get this one dry brush, stipple off a little bit of the paint, and then just go over the cloth. And by the way, I'm using a lot of paints. The whole list of paints will be in the description below. So we just do the same thing. First with the darkest Steel Legion Drab and moving our way up to the lightest color, which is in this case the bone. And again, I'm going a bit lighter than I would because I'm going to grime this up later and that will darken it all down. So now I've got the cloak and the armor pretty much blocked in. There's a few parts there that I just can't reach with a brush like this, so I'm just going to do that with a finer detail brush. And then it's time for the leather of the wolf skin. And again, I got a couple colors here. This is the equivalent to Rhinox Hide and Mournfang Brown. And again, I'm going to use a stippling motion, but this time with a much smaller brush, because otherwise I'm going to start hitting the parts that I've already painted. And I'm focusing on these sort of leathery bits of the skin, of course, and not so much the fur. The face I'll do, this paw I'll do, the rest of the fur I'm going to do it a little bit darker. But I want to have this contrast here at least between this sort of cloth and the leather that is underneath this nice ornate piece of armor. So again, stippling, 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 making sure everything gets covered, but I don't hit too much of the armor. And then the next step, I keep stippling, but now with a little pointier brush and the Deathcore Drab to sort of give it a little bit of a highlight, but again in a very blotchy and nasty style. And then it's time to do the fur, sort of the hairy bits of the wolf, but I'm gonna dry brush that instead. Using a flat dry brush, of course, not a round one. The flat one gives you a little bit more control and goes less into the recesses. And I'm using the same colors as I did with the skin, but I hope that with dry brushing, I'll get a slightly different texture so that the skin looks a little bit more smooth and the hair looks a little bit more hairy. And I think it worked out pretty well. Take a look. As you can see, the skin is a little bit redder and brighter than the hair, and it's also a little bit more shiny. The dry brushing gives it that nice chalky texture which you want for hair. Now it's going to get much better with washes and the enamels that are coming much later, but we keep blocking in colors first. And so now it's time for Necro Gold from scale 75, which is a really nice old tarnished gold, and I'm gonna do all of the armor trim and everything with this paint. Oh boy, that's a lot of gold for a space wolf, but that's okay. I think Vikings, they kind of like gold, right? They just didn't want to do any of the digging, so I think it suits him as well. Time for the skin, and I want to make him really pale to stick with that Nordic aesthetic. But if you want to paint something white, don't start with white. Start with something sort of creamy or tan or bone instead. And since I have Radukar flesh on my wet palette still, I'm just going to use that for the skin first. So I'm just going to give him a layer of this. Okay, one thin coat of Radukar flesh on the lighter parts, not the white parts, the lighter parts. And now it's time for some white. And in both cases, I'm just using one layer because that will leave quite a lot of the base layer shine through for both of them. And then it sort of looks like more mottled, kind of like how the armor looks right now. It's kind of blotchy, patchy, and I want that with the skin as well, because that will just have this more grimdark look and feel, and it will make him look more grizzled and old. You know, he doesn't have a perfect tan. This is a space wolf. He's half beast already, and what would he do tanning or putting on perfect foundation makeup to make his skin look perfect and not so blotchy? So all over, and the white is pretty thin down, pretty watery, so that it doesn't create a nice smooth layer. Again, I don't want too thin coats right here. Even though I'm using his paints, I'm not a fan of too thin coats. Cool, the pale white skin, it's a good canvas for later when I start using enamels to grime them up and the blood spatter and all the other stuff, because the lighter the skin, the more all of this stuff shows up. There's still a few things that I need to cover with a base layer before I can get to the most fun part. And so I'm gonna just speed these up a little bit because this isn't that interesting. First, Iron Warriors on all of the exposed metal parts like this spear, and I'm also gonna do the haft with this, and I'll give a couple of details here on the backpack. Then after that, a slightly lighter black for these hosers, and with slightly lighter black, I mean black but not exactly black, just a little lighter. Then after this, time for the banner, and I think I have to add a little bit of red to the miniature. I mean, take a look at him. He has all the space wolf colors except for red, because they usually have like a yellow and a red shoulder pad. And the yellow, well, that I'm doing with the gold, more or less, and now it needs a little bit of red. So I am going to start with some corn red for the background, and then the wolf is going to be the same slightly lighter black that I used for those hoses before, because, you know, don't paint with black. You don't need it. Paint with something a little bit lighter, and he needs a little bit of shading, so I'm gonna do his mane with a little bit of this Fenrisian blue that I've also used for the armor, and I'm just trying to get some stripes going, make it look like his mane is a little different color than the rest of the body of this wolf. So the base layers are done, and as you could have seen, I've done almost no highlighting at all. All it was is just stippling on some detail work, that's about it. Now it's time to shade them with a bunch of washes. And first of all, I'm going to do all the skulls, but I'm going to give them all a slightly different tint. So let's say this one over here, I'm going to put some Seraphim Sepia on. A bit of Athonian camo shade for the orc skull, because I think that makes sense. Greenish wash for an orc skull. And the other skull gets a wash with Agrax Earth shade. So now they're all different colors, and it sort of shows that they have aged differently, or that one is older than the other. They're not all there on the exact same time, all decaying at the exact same rate. Gives a little bit more interest in your mini. Now the skin needs some work too, so that one I'm gonna wash with some Reitland flesh shade, which will tint it more reddish, which I think, you know, could work for a Viking. Is maybe a little bit sunburned, but with the white undertone, underlayer, it will still be very, very pale and not become demonic, you know, like I did with this guy over here. The demonic skin, I don't think it works for this space wolf. He's not a demon. not yet. I'm talking about griming, but I haven't even done his beard and his hair yet. So let's do a little touch-ups here and there, make sure that, you know, there's no white in the beard, but I want to make him look like this old grizzled Viking, like the guy that may have lived a little bit past his prime and is desperately looking for an honorable death in battle. You know, I think it's a good background for this sort of Primarch, the Space Wolf Primarch, and I think it might be exactly what Russ is, you know, a grizzled old Viking past his prime, or maybe ascending, who knows. So for this beard, I'm just going to go with the grays that I used on the armor as well, but I'm just going to highlight very lightly here and there and just give him some of these sort of gray streaks in his beard and in his hair that make it look like it's sort of growing out, and in places it's getting gray. And I'm going to keep it like this, and then with the griming stage, the beard and the hair is also going to grime, because I think this Viking doesn't take good care of his hair. Yeah, future Friso over here. Editing, I realized I didn't switch on my top-down camera for the next couple of segments. It's just 3 segments, it's not too bad. And after that, I remember and I switch it back on, so we can see the stuff that I'm doing again. And for the griming, I'm going to start with a wash of Goon's Grime from Villainy Inks. It's kind of like streaking grime, but they have their own recipe and it's slightly less green, more brown. I haven't really worked with it before, so I'm going to give it a try. But the idea of this is a sort of unifying wash which tints everything more or less the same nasty grimy color. And then it's time to reduce the streaking grime with a Q-tip with just a little bit of white spirits on it. And I'm just going over the raised ridges, dabbing off the streaking grime. That's the beauty of this stuff, and it will make it look grimy in the recesses and not so much on the raised parts of the mini. I'm trying not to rub, because these Q-tips, they'll rub off your paint. But this is quite laborious work. I wouldn't do it for my regular infantry. For them, I would just use the brush technique, you know, just load your brush with streaking grime, wipe it off. But this way you have a little bit more control and it just looks better in the end. We keep going with the enamels of Villainy Ink, and this is Ichor of the Damned, which is a black enamel. And I'm going to use this on the gold because I want to tarnish it a little bit more and make it a little bit darker, because I still feel it's popping too much, especially these really big pieces that he has on his shoulder pad. And so I'm just going to give it a little bit of cover of the black, and then I'm going to reduce it in the same way with the cotton swab. And then it looks like this. It's still shiny because it's all wet, but I'm going to keep going with some rust streaks next. And I want to be subtle with this. It's a Space Wolf after all. He's not fallen to chaos yet. And so I'm just going to these places over here where I've scratched up the base of the armor a bit and add a little bit of rust over there. Similar all around the weapon where it's meeting the gold. You know, that's where some liquid, some humidity might get underneath it and start rusting the blade and rusting the haft and everything around the spear. Same with the jetpack. This vent, for example, is heating up. So, of course, it's going to start rusting. It starts to expand and contract, expand and contract. That means it starts to rust. And so we'll go all over the armor, little bit by little bit. Little fine rust details will make the blue stand out a lot more as well, because you're contrasting the blue with the red. So let's continue with a few details, like his mouth. I'm just taking some Carroburg Crimson just to make it a little bit redder. Give his lip a little bit of a red shine. And then his teeth just get a little bit of white. And I'm hitting the lips, so gotta go back in with some Carroburg Crimson again. Then for the eye, I'm getting some of the black Ichor of the Damned that I used as a wash before on the gold, because it's enamel, so I can sort of clean it off the top of the eyeball and make it kind of look like there's a pupil in there. First, I gotta get some of this stuff in there. Now, an old grizzled Viking like him needs some battle damage. So here I got some Iron Warriors, and I'm just gonna dry brush around the edges of the armor. And then with a bit of silver, I highlight the gold. And I'm trying to be very subtle with this. Just make it look a little shiny and a little bit more worn as well, because it could be battle damage, it could be just gold shine. Cool, so now the spear I also did with a little bit of silver, and then around the armor and the gold, a little bit of silver, gives a little bit more of a highlight, make it stand out a little bit more. And now I'm just going to do a very quick and easy glow effect for these jetpacks, and I'm just going to get some white in there and then turn it around and pull it up a little bit, and that will put more white in the bottom and a little bit on the edges. And then when this is dry, I get some contrast frost hard and I put it again in the center and I work my way up, and I let this miniature lay down to dry so that the contrast paint seeps into the burner, into the jetpack, and so the outsides will stay a little bit lighter. And it's time for the base. And I'm putting him on a 60mm base, of course, so I can proxy him for the Lion and the Guilliman, Helbrecht, Calgar, anything I want. And I got this little piece of terrain. This comes from the Hivestorm Kill Team box, the little piece of terrain. Looks nice, Imperial, and importantly, it has this little ridge over here. And so my idea is I can put him on here, make a nice dynamic pose out of it like this. But I can use as much glue as I like, but this is never going to stick. So I have to pin him. So time to drill some holes. Tiny hole here on the ball of his foot, and then this rod goes in, snip it off, put a little paint on the tip, get him in the right spot in one go. Drill a little hole there as well. He'll fit like this. And this is not exactly how I wanted him, but it was just impossible to get the hole in the right place for the pinning. Like this, I can easily pin him. Now I want him to sort of stand like this, where he is moving up, but looking in a different direction. It's a nice dynamic pose, and I just have to put this piece of terrain now onto the base. And for that, I'm gonna shave off a little bit and then just fill up the space with some cork. This here on this side, it needs to come off because I want to have a relatively flat underground for this piece of terrain. I can't just balance it on one of these corner edges because it will just never stay in place. So this needs to some cleaning up and some flattening out, and then with a big glob of green stuff, it's reinforced now, and I think that should be good enough, and it will keep the weight even when I put the Primarch back on there. Now I need some base decorations, and I've got this beautiful orc body from my Grand Marshal Helbrecht, because my Helbrecht, it looks like that. There's no orc on that base anymore, and this is a very old kitbash. I'm sorry there's no video of it, but hey, you got this one instead. So with him in place, I'm gonna get some cork built up here. So here's some pieces of cork that I just kind of shove in here, and also try to get it into the green stuff a little bit so that it better blends. And I just build maybe 2-3 layers over here to see if I can support that piece of plastic a little bit more. Now let's do a really quick orc paint scheme. A dry brush of Elysian green and a wash of Nuln oil for the skin. A light dry brush of Rakard flesh over the pants. Then I wash that with Nuln oil as well. The metal is done with Iron Warriors, and you guessed it, washed with Nuln oil. And finally, these leather straps, they get a layer of contrast wildwood. And no, I'm not gonna wash that. But this is a pretty neat orc scheme, I think. And it's good, because I need to practice for when I'm painting up this big guy over here. This bit of rubble gets a dry brush of Mechanicus Standard Grey. All of the metallic looking bits get some Typhus Corrosion, because I want this to look really old and rusted out. This is like an old battlefield where an old space wolf is still walking around. Time for some texture pastes. First, these blocks over here that come from the cork, I'm just gonna give them a layer of asphalt from AK Interactive, while the rest of the base gets some Astro Granite debris. And that's enough texture paste for one base. Let's bring the piece in line with the actual space wolf that's gonna be on top of it. And I'm gonna do that with a load of streaking grime, because this needs to become as grimy and dirty and dusty as the space wolf that's walking on top of it. Now I've reduced the streaking grime a little bit, and it's time I try out this one, Sector Rust from Villainy Inks as well. I wanna give all of these enamels a little try, see how they work, and I think this is a good miniature to try it out on, because you know, the base, if I mess it up, I can easily fix it again. So let's put some rust on all of these parts that I hit with Typhus Corrosion, and I'm gonna see if I can just get it into the recesses, make it look like the places where there's moisture getting stuck, that's where the rust appears the most. And then with a little bit of dark brown wash from AK, I just add a little bit of variation to the base, just to make it look less homogeneous. Now I've been watching this thing dry slowly bit by bit, and I feel that's a little bit missing here. There's not enough texture on the base, so I'm just gonna add some watered down PVA glue right around here, and some more direct PVA glue on the base, and then I'm gonna add some of this city rubble that I have over here. Time for some blood effects, because the base, it's pretty much done. Radukar needs to be pinned on there, but I have to do the blood effects differently, because I want to do some blood spatter on Radukar, the space wolf, and a little bit of blood here on the orc, but I don't want blood spatter all over this base, because he might not have been fighting right there. So for the orc, I'm just gonna add a little bit of blood here to the gaping hole in his chest, and I'm gonna add some more over here where his arm used to be, just to make it look like, well, it used to be there and now he's bleeding from there. And whenever I paint blood on orcs, I always get these questions like, fungus don't bleed? Yeah, but you know, fungus usually don't grow bones and teeth and wear clothes and talk either. Now for the space wolf, I'm gonna do some very subtle blood spatter, just with a flat brush like this, soak it in blood paint, and then with a little toothpick. I'm just going to flick on tiny drops of blood here and there on him. And I'm taking care that it sort of ends up on the bottom and around the cloaks, you know, places that are swinging around on the battlefield and that might get hit by some blood spatter. And then after this, I take a fine detail brush and the same blood paint, and I just find these bigger globs that are splattered onto the mini, and I sort of drag them down to make it look like there's a glob of blood going there, and then it seeps down along the mini. And this takes a little while, but I think it's worth it. Then it's time for some bigger and rougher blood work. And I just take the same flat dry brush and I'm going to start making these sort of streaks, like as if you're dry brushing on the weapons, where he might stab something, hack something, or maybe over here, like with the shield, he probably slams somebody with the shield and he gets a streak of blood on it coming like this. You know exactly where it's dented. That makes sense. You dent your shield on an orc skull occasionally. Nice, he's got some good freshish blood effects on the spear, on the shield here, and his hand as well, because if he has a claw like that, he's probably using it. Now what I want as well is a little bit of coagulated blood, because so far I've used this zombie gore from Tooth and Coats. Now I'm going to use Carrion Crimson from Villainy Inks, and these are enamels. And this enamel, it is really nice, because if it dries up, it's great and absolutely amazing for demon skin. Like this here. This is my Abaddon the Word Bearer, which I painted before. And now I'm going to use this to create sort of coagulated blood in the recesses of this spear. You see this skull around there? I'm just going to try and drip some of this around it. And then if I leave it to dry a little bit, it'll dry up like the enamel, like I used before with Streaking Grime. You can reduce it, so you can remove it from the upper parts and it will just seep into the recesses. And I'll show you my wet palette over here. You can see that there's like chunks of pigment in there. And that will dry up on the mini and it will look amazing like coagulated blood. And when I finally put him on his base, this is what he looks like. And I think he looks epic. A true Space Wolf Primarch. Armed with spear and shield, the eye patch, vaulting off a piece of rubble onto his next prey. I think he looks epic. He looks brutal. He looks like an old grizzled Viking. His armor is battered. The shine is knocked off the gold, but he keeps going. And he has a little bit of that mutation that Space Wolf always have the risk of falling to. I love him. I think he's going to get pride of place in my collection. And in the meantime, I've been working on this guy, my paint boss. So if you want to see that video too, you should subscribe. Don't forget to like this video, and in the meantime, check out this video next.